In this video, we're going to learn how to define the physician work pattern. So we're going to click on the Appointment tab and choose the Work Pattern option. Now, the work pattern interacts with the scheduling module so that everybody booking appointments knows exactly what physician is available at which location and what days of the week. This also works at the convenience for those of you utilizing the patient portal who's going to allow your patients to search for their next available slot. Now, on our work pattern page, you'll notice in the upper right, we have a drop-down list of all of our providers. We're going to choose Dr. Cooper for our example. And as his work pattern displays, notice across the bottom of this page, there are some grid showing default as well as exceptions. You can have multiple default patterns as well as multiple exceptions to each default. And this way, you are able to accommodate various scenarios in your office. Especially is this advantageous when you have multiple providers and the providers are rotating call or covering each other's vacations and holidays. On the left-hand side of Dr. Cooper's default work pattern, we see a start and finish date. This is required in the system in order to accommodate the exceptions rule. Now, if you are going to maintain your work patterns consistently, you don't need to go very far forward with your finish date. However, if you do not, and that finish date comes and goes, you will not be able to book an appointment without overcoming errors in the system. So it is recommended to go forward far enough to accommodate those appointment situations. As we look at Dr. Cooper's work pattern in the middle, we see the days of the week in a grid, and you'll see that Sunday and Saturday are already listed as off. And we cannot actually book him on those days because at a system level, the clinic is actually closed. For the days of the week that the clinic is open, however, we notice as we click on that day of the week, we can define a location by choosing in our drop-down, as well as the start and end time at that location. For instance, on Monday, Dr. Cooper is at On the Bay Clinic from 9 to 12. He's making hospital rounds from 1 to 5, and then goes to the sports clinic in the evening from 6 to 8. The gap between 12 and 1, as well as between 5 and 6, will show as lunch breaks or travel time on his schedule. As we look at just the other days of the week visually, you'll notice he has different hours at different locations. And ultimately for Dr. Cooper, Friday, he is actually off. He's not scheduled anywhere. For this exercise, however, we're going to build an exception to this work pattern that says one Friday a month Dr. Cooper actually works. So we're going to select a blank exception rule record at the bottom. We will go ahead and populate our start and ending date. Again, moving several years forward so that we don't have to remember to come in and modify it very frequently. And we're simply going to name it his Friday exception. We will therefore choose Friday. And in our exception pattern, we can choose whether we want this to be every second week of the month, every third week of the month, or perhaps the last week of the month. We're just going to go ahead and choose it as the last week of the month. And for that last week of the month, we're going to put Dr. Cooper at North End Outpatient. And we will let him work the entire day. But since we're not going to give him a lunch, we'll let him get off a little early, so we'll just work him until 3:30. And we're going to go ahead and save that work pattern. Now, to visually see how the work pattern displays on the schedule, we're going to go back and look at the schedule from Penny's perspective. Remember that the schedule page is typically where our front office staff does the bulk of their work. And as we see here, you can visually look at the doctor's schedule by the color coding that we've defined at each location and each day of the week, with the gray areas being when the doctor is blocked for lunch or travel. So for instance, on Friday the 28th, he is showing as being at the North End Clinic. On the left-hand side here where we see our calendar, we will notice that the 28th is in fact the last week of the month. So if we move forward, for instance, and look at next week's schedule, on Friday the 4th, since it is not the last week of the month, he should be showing as off, as his default work pattern says. And that in fact is the case. As we look here through Friday, November 4th, it is showing as gray, whereas the other days of the week he is working.